Welcome to TaNaCh Talk. I am your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Controversial Issues with the most controversial rabbi on the internet, Rabbi Chaim Checkmate Coffman in the blue corner. Welcome back, Rabbi. How are you today?
Doing just great. I just live for the introduction. That's the best part of the show.
Excellent. I'm glad you enjoyed that.
And the music, sorry. The music's the best part of the show.
That's great. Okay, so here we are at Isaiah 53. Now, I understand you're going to be covering a lot more than just that, but that's going to be the centerpiece on this table is Isaiah 53, and everything else will go, we'll work around it to help explain the real truth that Christians tend to not only overlook, but often just flat out reject. So take it away. It's all yours, my man.
All right. Always a pleasure to be here, as usual. And what's the problem with Isaiah 53, TaNaCh chapter 9, all these other things, either mistranslations or what we always say, you have to look at context. Now, what's going on over here? Right? What's going on is that Isaiah 53, what's it talking about? Right? It mentions the servants. Now, their claim, and we're going to see, their claim is, who's that servant? That servant's JC. Right? But we hold that the servant's going to be who? Is the nation of Israel. Right? That suffered and continues to suffer at the hands of who? Of the Gentiles, right? We suffered a lot. We suffered a lot before. We're going to suffer a lot, after. And this is extremely, extremely debated over here. That we're talking about as well, Messianic age and the final redemption, right? The final redemption of the Jewish people, which is going to be the end, right? The end over here of that final exile, right? This bitter exile that we're in. If you look at Isaiah 53 verse 1, what does it say? Who would have believed our reports, right? An unbelievable thing. All the world leaders are going to wonder aloud in dazed bewilderment. They're going to be shocked. Jewish people come out of it. Jewish people down, seemingly out for the count. Right? They're out for the count. This whole thing. And and they come out of it. Right? So, when we look at this, we're talking about, no question, at the end of the book of Isaiah, it's pretty clear. We're talking about the salvation. Right? We're talking about the salvation of the Jewish people. That is the theme. If you look at Isaiah 52, we're going to go back and look at some things here. Isaiah 52 verse 12, it says you. When it says you, who does that signify? Jewish people, right? Who are sheltered, delivered by God. The afflicted barren woman. In the following chapter 54 verse 1, is protected and saved by God also. Who is that a reference to? It's a reference to Jewish people. Right? So again, when we look at what is actually said, then you have to see the context. Right? So there's a claim by these Christians who are going to argue wrongly. I don't know if most people are aware, but we're going to bring this out anyway. They're going to argue in the name of Rashi. Right? Rashi lived in the year 1040, the Common Era, to 1105 of the Common Era, right? 11th century, mid 11th century. So Rashi identifies the suffering servants as who? The nation of Israel. Now, they may claim that, but actually, what they're going to say is totally inaccurate, totally misleading, because there was an influential church father in the year 248 of the Common Era, 8 centuries, right? We're going 8 centuries, 800 years, can't do the math, 800 years before Rashi's born. Now, what was the claim? name was Origen, and wants to look him up, that the consensus among the Jews, he said, is the fact that Isaiah 53 bears reference, quotes, to the whole Jewish people, regarded as one individual, and as being in a state of dispersion and suffering, so that many proselytes might be gained on account of the dispersion of the Jews among these non-Jewish nations. Right? That's his own claim. That's his own claim over here. So he's saying, very, very simply, that who's it a reference to? Who's it an obvious reference to? The Jewish people. And the Jewish people suffering. Now, even though there might be this broad consensus, certainly among us, maybe even some of the Christians, that the servants that's mentioned in Isaiah 52 and in Isaiah 53, same thing, nation of Israel, makes sense, right? Makes sense according to the context. Now, you have to understand as well, Isaiah 53 is the fourth of four renowned servant songs. There are four servant songs that mention this suffering servant. And they're all connected. Guess what? Let's repeat that. They're all connected to preceding chapters. Meaning, if they're all connected, you can't pull one thing out from everything else. Like, no, this is talking about JC, and this is a hint, and this is a reference, and all that. Because if you're going to tell me that, but the other chapters are talking about the Jewish people, doesn't fit. So if you're going to talk about a suffering servant, quote unquote, make it the same in each chapter, right? Don't tell me, oh, this one's talking about him, but the other is talking about something else. Well, either they're consistent or they're not consistent. So if you look at the servant in each of the three previous servant songs, right, and we're going to see some quotes here, plainly, repeatedly identified as what? As the nation of Israel, right? Make no mistake. That's who it's referring to. So, first reference, Isaiah 41, verses 8 to 9. It says, but you, Israel, my servant, get it? Israel, my servant. Jacob, who I've chosen, offspring of Abraham, my friend, who I took from the ends of the earth, called from the father's corners, furthest, I don't know, say my Boston accent, father's corner, saying to you, you are my servant, I have chosen you and not cast you off. This is a pretty clear thing over here. Who's my servant? Israel. You are my servant. Who's he talking about? The Jewish people. Isaiah 44 verse 1. But now hear, O Jacob, my servant, Israel, whom I've chosen. Gee, another coincidence. Israel, my servant. Isaiah 44 verse 21. Remember these things, O Jacob and Israel, for you are my servant. I formed you. You are my servant. O Israel, you will not be forgotten by me. I think that's enough, isn't it? Isaiah 45 verse 4. For the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel, my chosen, I called you by your name. I name you, though you do not know me. Chastised. They're being yelled at over here for not keeping the covenant, not doing what they're supposed to do. But again, my servant Jacob and Israel. Go a little bit further, Isaiah 48 verse 20. Go out from Babylon, free from Chaldea. Declare this with a shout of joy. Proclaim it. Send it out to the end of the earth. Say, the Lord has redeemed his servant Jacob. Servant Jacob, Israel. Isaiah 49 verse 3. He said to me, you are my servant Israel, in whom I will be glorified. Now, how many quotes is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 quotes, right, in the previous 7, 8 chapters, right, that all claim the same thing. My servant Jacob, Israel. Israel, my servant Jacob, right, etc. They all claim the same thing. Who's the servant? Who's the servant talking about? The Jewish people. So what is Isaiah? Now let's understand. What is Isaiah 53 talking about? What is the context? So the context is world leaders are going to cry aloud in the Messianic era. We have to understand the Messianic era, which we're living in right now, is going to be horrific for the Jewish people. Right? Jewish people are going to be downtrodden, beaten up, destroyed, or partially destroyed, whatever the case is. Going to have a lot of issues. Going to be a lot of bloodshed, right, in this era. So, first of all, that's what he's crying out about. Second thing is, it says in Isaiah 52, verse 15, the humbled kings of nations will confess Jewish suffering occurred as a direct result for what? Our own iniquity. My Rebbe would say, I'm not worried, about what happens in Iran. I'm not worried what's going to happen with Hamas and all these things. I'm worried about Jews who sinned. Jews in the land that sin. Jews everywhere. God forbid that sin. So what happens? Why is there suffering amongst the Jewish people, even though God says we're his chosen nation, right? So we're his chosen nation, got this great covenant, and what happens? Jews getting destroyed, right? All throughout history, we spoke about this. We went all throughout Jewish history. The Jewish people should never be here. But make no mistake, what's the problem? Why we get tossed around like a rag doll? Because as it says in Isaiah 52 verse 15, and Isaiah is a prophet, right? Let's understand, saying in the name of God, not a false prophet, God forbid. It's a direct result of what? Our own iniquity. Our own sins over here. You look at Isaiah 53 verse 5, depraved Jew hatred, rather than these previously thought stubborn blindness of the Jews. You're going to have all this Jew hatred. We see it now. It's all over, right? It's, you look like an Orthodox Jew. It's like you're sitting duck, right? In some places. So the world's nations over here, they're going to see this, they're going to have this reaction to this vindication, redemption of the Jewish nation when they're getting slaughtered and they're getting beaten up in the Messianic era. This is a recurring theme, an absolute recurring theme among Jewish history. We have in Isaiah 41 verse 11, Micah, or Micah as he's known, chapter 7 verses 15 to 16, Jeremiah chapter 16 verses 19 to 20. Very common theme, right? Common theme over here, that there's going to be redemption. There's going to be this redemption of the Jewish people. Now, the Jews, what's the problem? Jews have been downtrodden, beaten up, all these things. And the people around, Israel are going to say, wow, what an amazing thing. And they're going to say, oh, the Jews did it. They killed JC. They did these other things. All this iniquity, they've been beaten up, destroyed, throughout history. They're going to be shocked. They're going to be amazed when they see what's going to happen, and they're going to be stunned. They're like, what happened? Jews got beaten down here, beaten down there. All of a sudden, all the nations get knocked out. The Messiah finally comes. Shocking. Absolutely shocking. Because they're going to say, come on, the Jews get knocked down all the time. What's going on over here? They're going to think, oh, play that Rocky music. Oh, you're going to play the Rocky music. They're going to say, what's going on? He's fighting back. They're taking over. It's over here. No, right? They're going to be shocked over here. So this bitter exile, everything that's gone on, the terrible things, we rejected all the world's religions, so to speak, but that's going to change. That is going to change. Says Isaiah chapter 53, verse 3, we despised, held of him of no account. Nonetheless, we were still faithful. The one true God, even though it might be a remnant, that's going to be left. I don't think the majority of Jews are going to be left at the end of days. Seems like, only the ones that believe in him are going to be left. But at the same time, there are those that are totally faithful, no matter what happens to the Jewish people, but nonetheless, we get tossed around. So the final redemption is going to come. And everyone's going to be shocked. And in Isaiah 53 verse 1, it would have been believed. This report, the king's going to ask with their mouths wide open, right, in amazement. And 52 verse 10 says the curtain of blindness is finally lifted, the holy arm of the Lord before the eyes of all the nations. All the ends of the earth will witness salvation of his people. It's going to be known. Everybody's going to know. It's going to be witnessed. Jewish people came out, basically, we'll say, from the ashes, right? They came out, just about to be destroyed. Salvation comes, blink of an eyelash. So now there's going to be questions, though. What's the question going to be? One of the questions is, how can we explain the suffering at our own hands? How will we explain it? Right? It's hard to imagine over here that Israel's, been in agony for centuries, millennium. But who's to blame? Who's to blame for all this? So the question is, why did the servant of God, quote unquote, seem to suffer without measure or cause? Right? That's the question. The whole idea of suffering. If we're God's chosen people, boy, what a covenant. Unbelievable covenant. Who wants to join and get destroyed? Right? Who wants to be part of the Jewish people, walk on a college campus and be spit on? Right? Or get beaten up or whatever. Who's interested in signing up? So what's the question? Why? Why does this happen? We've spoken about suffering, in general, and how it works. Bottom line is because we do things wrong. That's the bottom line. It comes along Isaiah chapter 53, verse 8. There's a stunning confession. What's the stunning confession? For the transgressions of my people, the Gentile nations, they, the Jews, are stricken. In other words, why does it happen? You know why it happens? Because we're our own worst enemy. We brought it upon ourselves. Why? Because we didn't keep the covenant. We didn't do what we're supposed to do. So in that verse, chapter 53, verse 8, the servant is spoken of in third person. Now, most church fathers can't read Hebrew, right? They're only going to get it from the translation. But we're going to tell you in Hebrew, this word that the Jews are stricken, so to speak, the transgressions of my people, that servant, who's it talking about? It's in third person. Lamo is third person, right? If it's third person, it cannot be singular over here, right? The servant is a nation, third person, not first person, right? So in other words, you're going to look at this word and say, my servants. If you would say my servant, so to speak, then you'd have to say lami, right? My servants. It's saying the servants, third person. Sorry, let's say better. Third person, plural, over here. It's saying lamo. That's the word. Lamo means is plural. Third person, plural. So that shows just grammatically. It cannot be talking about first person, singular. Kind of hard to do that because the language is in plural, right? So that's a major giveaway. Major giveaway here, right? That's one thing. Now, if you look at, which people are going to hate this, but doesn't matter. You look at rabbinic literature of Isaiah 53, right? And the surrounding chapters. You can't look at TaNaCh in general just by itself. And we've said before, we said many times, you cannot cherry pick one verse, in the middle of many verses, let's say at the end of a chapter, and say, oh, this is what it means. One example, right, we've spoken about, Jeremiah chapter 30. Right, at the end of the chapter, almost at the end of the chapter, talks about the new covenant. New covenant. Jews aren't chosen. Forget about internal logic. What about all the previous verses in the chapter where Jeremiah is chastising the Jewish people about not keeping Torah mitzvahs and not reconnecting to the old covenant? Oh, you forgot about that? All of a sudden, everybody's got amnesia, right? They all have degenerate brain disease. Right? They're all whatever. All of a sudden they got Alzheimer's. What happened to the 30 verses before? 25 verses before? You just throw it out and say, no, we don't need these verses. We're going to focus on one verse out of 30. Right? 25, whatever it is. Right? It's an incredible thing. Totally taken out of context over here. Now, it's pretty clear that we hold that the nation of Israel not an individual. The nation of Israel is despised, is afflicted, Isaiah 54 verses 6 to 11, and oppressed without cause, Isaiah 52 verse 4, at the hands of the Gentile nations. Now, what does that sound like? It doesn't sound like an individual. It's talking about the entire nation. You see, when the Jewish people get hit, it's not individuals. When Hitler, Yamach Shemoy V'zichro, may his name be blotted out, may he rot wherever he was. If you had any Jewish blood in you, doesn't matter from the mother, from the father, you had any Jewish blood, he wanted to annihilate you. Right? It doesn't matter. Right? So there's hatred without cause. They said, what do you mean? Why do you want to kill us? Why do you despise us? We're just like you. We married your women. We fought in your wars. We went to universities. We're just like you. And what did he say? Doesn't matter. You should be dead. So there's been oppression. There's been affliction. The Jews have been despised. But who is it talking about? Is it talking about just one individual? No. It's talking about a nation. And when one person does something wrong, when a Jew does something wrong, the whole nation gets blamed. You never hear, if an Italian does something egregious, does something terribly wrong, in Brooklyn, you're going to say, okay, burn down Italy. No more cannolis. Never happened. Why would it never happen? Because they're going to say, one individual, crazy individual, did this, did that, right? Does it make a mark in his nationhood and where he belongs, where his affiliation is? No. If a Jew does something wrong, even if he doesn't, we get blamed for all kinds of things, right? But they're going to say it's all the Jews. So we have a Talmudic dictum, all Jews are interrelated. You don't see that by other nations. So therefore, Jews do the wrong thing. We all get blamed. We all get blamed. So we're despised. We're afflicted. We're oppressed. Not just one Jew. Not just secular Jews. Religious Jews. Everybody combined. You had secular Jews. In Russia, the former Soviet Union, they couldn't go to university. They had other issues. Making a living had nothing to do with religion. They were the meeting that they weren't religious. Doesn't matter. They identified as being Jewish, their mistake. But they identify as being Jewish. That's it. You're not going to university. You're not going to get a higher job. You're going to be stuck doing other things. But we're not religious. We're just like you. We're common. No. So we're despised without cause. That's not a person. That's the entire nation, been that way throughout history. Now, the identification of Israel as God's servants is very clear, right? It's very clear, which we're going to see. We're going to see in a number of places here in Isaiah. You got Isaiah 41 verses 8 to 9, Isaiah 43 verse 10, Isaiah 44 verse 1, verse 21, 45 verse 4, 48 verse 20, 49 verse 3. All talking about the servants, right, being the being the Jewish people over here. Right? So many rabbinic sources identify Isaiah 53 as what? As talking about the Jewish people. Now, people can say, well, this is rabbinic law. This okay. So we're going to bring down it anyway. It says in Brachot 5a, it says, Rav said the name of Rav Schora, who said in the name of Rav Huna, whoever, the Holy One, blessed be he, desires, he crushes with affliction. Right? Now let's understand, he crushes with affliction. How do I know? What's the source? Isaiah 53 verse 10. The one who Hashem desires, he crushed with sickness. Who's that talking about? Jewish people. Now, a person might have thought, the Gemara continues, that this applies even if he doesn't accept the afflictions with love. Oh, maybe you'll tell me it's talking about where he didn't accept the affliction with love. So what does Scripture therefore tell me? It tells me further that the continuation of the verse, if his soul acknowledges his guilt, you have to acknowledge he did something wrong. And if he accepts the affliction with love, what's his rewards? He'll see his offspring, live long days. He'll retain his studies. As it's stated, the desire of Hashem will succeed in his hand. So you got one source saying that who does God desire to crush? The one he loves. Crushes them with sickness. It's punishment. Over here, the ancient Medrash Rabbah, Numbers 23, says the same thing. It says, I've eaten my honeycomb with my honey, Song of Songs, chapter 5, verse 1, because the Israelites poured out their soul to die in captivity. Oh, how do I know? As it says, because he poured out his soul to die. What's the source? Isaiah 53, verse 12. Now, when we look at what the Christians did over here, so there's a whole thing going on over here. There's a consensus among liberals. I didn't know there was such a thing. Liberal Christian commentators, right? That hold what? They hold what the rabbi said, right? Because if you look at the 11th century Rashi, as we mentioned, and the 20th century Christian Oxford New English Bible, right? A lot of different translations of the Bible. But if we look at the Christian Oxford New English Bible, they're very similar. Who do they identify the suffering servant Isaiah 53? Even the Christian Oxford Bible says the nation of Israel, who suffered as a humiliated individual at the hands of the Gentile nations. So those are some liberal Christian commentators. Now, what about conservative ones? So they argue against this, right? They're going to argue against this for, obvious reasons. First of all, what are they using it for? They're using it as the most important proof text. They're using it as proof over here to demonstrate the truth of their gospel. What's their arguments? That the chapter proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that the death of JC was prophesied in the Hebrew Scriptures. Right? When in doubt, put it on a verse that has no connection and say, this is what it represents. Right? This is what it is. Because if you look at the author of the book of Acts, what is the claim? One of their claims is the fact that Philip converted an Ethiopian eunuch using Isaiah 53. Right? You also have others, if Luke, if John, if Peter, and other places associating Isaiah 53 saying, right, represents JC, right, as we mentioned. So they could say, oh, there are all these verses throughout the Hebrew Bible, that's who it is, that's what it represents, but again, there are only a handful of texts, if you look throughout TaNaCh, that the church is going to say that this represents JC. In other words, they're not going to say throughout the prophets, throughout the Old Testament, all these references of JC, handful. There's going to be a handful of representing him as, let's make clear, representing him alone as the Messiah. That's a whole different thing. They may have other passages say, oh, it's a hint to him, it's this, but not representing him as the official, quote unquote, the Messiah. Right? That's what Isaiah 53 does. So you got to get missionaries and others say that Isaiah predicted this, right? He predicted it. He predicted Christianity centuries before. Isn't that amazing? It's unbelievable. In other words, it's a whole prediction of something that happens in the future before it happened. Now, we have mentioned before, there are certain prophecies. There are prophecies in the Torah itself, especially in the book of Deuteronomy, right, that say this is going to happen in the future, right, to the Jewish people. And all these things, all these curses that the book of Deuteronomy talks about, etc., they all happened. They all occurred, right? But it's just interesting, right? They're going to claim that Isaiah is talking about this, centuries before. And they're gonna laugh at us and say, come on, you're really gonna interpret this fourth servant song as talking about the Jewish people? Come on, what are you guys, square? How could you believe in such a thing? They're using it obviously for their own teachings in order to put a text based on him and what he did and the fact that he's quote unquote the Messiah. Now, this is problematic in a number of ways, right? Especially when it comes when it comes to theology over here, right? In other words, if the whole chapter and a number of these chapters are talking about Jewish suffering, right? There's a systematic problem. The systematic problem is, what does that have to do with Christian theology? What do Christians care that Jews are suffering? They're going to say, you didn't believe in us. You didn't believe in JC. Of course you're going to suffer. But if the Jewish people suffer, and that's what it's talking about, and that's what these four songs of suffering are speaking about, the fact that Jewish people are suffering like no tomorrow, what does that have to do with Christians? What does that have to do with their major theology, right over here? If you want to tell me their whole thing is about the suffering of JC, and that's the cornerstone of church doctrine, I get it, right? Because that's what it is. That makes sense. And throughout history, that's what they're going to say, right? And they're going to conclude, so why do we suffer? So what's the point of the Jewish people suffering, right? Why are you going to say we suffer? Because we have the wrong beliefs. We're going to suffer. We're going to suffer because we didn't believe in the right people. We didn't believe in the right religion or whatever. But why does JC suffer over here? Right? They're going to say, well, him and his followers illustrate truth. Our suffering, no, a totally different thing. So therefore, they're going to say our interpretation totally wrong, right? Totally wrong over here. Now, what's the difference? Just throw this out there. What's the difference with what, let's say, liberated or liberal Christian scholars and classic rabbinic commentary, right? Liberal Christians don't depend on the church dogma. They don't rely necessarily on what the church says in order to interpret the Bible. In other words, they have their own commentaries. They have their own commentators, right? They're going to interpret without any preconceived notion. What the church says, what the church doesn't say, to them that doesn't matter. They're going to interpret it however they're going to interpret it. But if you look at the first three servant songs, again, Israel, you identify Israel as God's servant. Surrounding chapters, Israel as a suffering, humiliated individual. Right? So even liberals over here are going to say, yeah, same thing. That this fourth song, Isaiah 53, 100% is going to say that. Now, just an interesting point. One interesting point. The Christian New Bible, Oxford edition, annotation of Isaiah 52 verses 52:13 to verses 53 verse 12. Right? So between Isaiah 52:13 and 53 verse 12, this is what they say. This is what it says in the Christian New Bible. Quote, the fourth servant song, the suffering servant Israel. Let me repeat that. The suffering servant Israel, servant of God, has suffered as a humiliated individual. However, servant endured without complaint because it was vicarious suffering. What does that mean? Suffering for others. 52:13 to 15. Nations and kings, be surprised, see the servant exalted. 53 verse 1. Crowds, pagan nations, among the servant Israel lived. Speak here through verse 9, saying the significance of Israel's humiliation. Exaltation is hard to believe. Right? See also the Revised Standard Bible, Oxford Study Edition, page 889. So the, their own information, right? Their own information of the Christian New Bible. Now, people are going to say, oh, there are 150,000, different translations and this and that. Maybe it's just a bad one, maybe. But this one claims the fourth servant in Isaiah 53 is what? The suffering servant, i.e. the Jewish people, right? That's going to be a problem. That's going to be a major problem, right? Now, Isaiah 53 in context, is that referring to the Messiah? So when we look at it, that prophet is not speaking about all the Jewish people, right? That's true. The servant in these uplifting prophetic pages over here is talking about who? The righteous remnant of Israel. Who's going to be left? Who's going to be left at the end of days? The most pious of the nation. So the faithful members of Israel are going to suffer for heaven's sake, etc. Who are they identified in TaNaCh as? God's servants. They are the devout that call upon the name of the Lord, i.e. Isaiah 43 verse 7. They bear witness to his unity, Isaiah 43 verse 11, and therefore charged to restore the rest of Jacob, Isaiah 49 verse 5. Right? So in other words, you're going to have the righteous, and they suffer. Now, does that mean they're born to suffer? No. Right? But they will suffer because they bear greater responsibility, for the sake of the nation. But they are going to be the chosen remnant over here. Now, Isaiah 43 verse 10, you are my witnesses, declares the Lord, and my servant who I have chosen. So God's servant is who? The cherished few, the ones that walk in his path, one that walks in his footsteps, i.e. of Abraham, who God called my friend. Isaiah 41 verse 8, but you, O Israel, my servant Jacob, again, O Israel, my servant Jacob, who I've chosen you, descendants of Abraham, my friend. Servant song addresses who? Believers of Israel, followers of Abraham, right, who emulate him. And what did Abraham have? He had also tremendous trials, tremendous adversity in walking with God, right? So too with his servant. He's an offspring of him. That says Isaiah 49 verse 3, Isaiah 51 verse 21, Isaiah 54 verse 11, Isaiah 44 verses 11 to 15. Comes along the prophet Zephaniah, or Zephaniah, as we would call him. Also, the remnant of Israel, similar thing. Zephaniah chapter 3 verses 12 to 13. I'm going to leave in the midst of thee an afflicted and poor people. They shall take refuge in the name of the Lord. The remnant of Israel shall do no iniquity, nor speak lies, neither shall deceitful tongue be found in their mouth. They shall feed and lie down. None shall make them afraid. Right? So what is that talking about? It's talking about God's faithful. The ones who stick to God, whatever he says, no matter what. They can be Gentiles also. Doesn't necessarily mean, they're all Jews over here. That you see Zechariah chapter 13, verses 8 to 9. They also suffer, on behalf of God. Got Isaiah chapter 40 verse 2, Zechariah chapter 1 verse 15. You have Jewish leaders of the past. You got Moses, Jeremiah, Rabbi Akiva, as well as future figures, i.e. the Messiah of Joseph, the Messiah of David. Going to be held up in rabbinical literature as individuals exemplify the servant willingly suffers on behalf of heaven. In other words, they're going to have a hard time. The Messiah of Joseph, there's difference of opinion whether he gets killed or not. Now, everyone's going to agree he's the Messiah. No one's going to disagree, right? But they suffer. They go through a lot of suffering, over here. The Messiah of David, we've mentioned many times, he can't die, right? He cannot die in the process. So he's not going to die. But doesn't mean he's not going to suffer. He's not going to have difficulty, right? So in the Gemara, Sanhedrin 98a describes the predicament of the Messiah, that he's going to be waiting for God to send him out. Right? What does it say? It says, sitting among other paupers, all of them afflicted with disease, while the rest of them tie and untie their bandages all at once. The Messiah changes his bandages one at a time, lest he be summoned for the redemption at a moment's notice. He's not living their life of Riley. He is not kicking back, sipping pina coladas like I'm going to be when I'm in Florida next week. I'm going to be sipping pina coladas. The Messiah is not sipping pina coladas here. Right? He's also going through difficulty. Not having it easy. So now you're going to say, wow, was that an allegory? Do we have to take this seriously? Word by word over here. There's a message. What's the message? The Messiah is somebody who's going to be like an afflicted member of the Jewish people. And the Jewish people suffer. They endure agony, trials. Anyone who's faithful to God, they have difficulty. Right? Everybody has difficulty. But unlike any other suffering saints, quote unquote, who remove all their bandages before patiently replacing them with fresh dressing, the Messiah must methodically replace each bandage one at a time. Now, what does that sound like? What does that mean in the vernacular? In other words, he doesn't suffer more or less than other servants of God. Right? He's different. He's greater than other people, no question. But he's got to be ready at a moment's notice to bring in the redemption. So he's prepared to be summoned at any time. So he's never, in a predicament where his bandages are fully removed. He's got to be ready, right? But he suffers like everybody else. In general, the Jewish people suffer. Now, what's the reason we mentioned before? What's the reason they suffer? They suffer because of sin. Repentance goes a long way. But if they continue to sin, they're in trouble, over here. So that suffering remnant of the Jewish people, this Messianic king, is also included, who comes from King David. And that's an integral member of the righteous, right, of the Jewish people. So according to us, according to quote-unquote rabbinic interpretation, plain meaning of the text in Isaiah chapter 52, verse 13 to 53, verse 12, right? So that's what it means. That's what it means over here. So when we look at earlier commentators, later commentators, clear meaning of the text, the suffering servant is a nation. Also, Ezekiel warns the righteous can never suffer or die as a sacrificial atonement for the wicked. Now, it's interesting, right? It's interesting over here, what they're going to do, what the Christians are going to do with that, right? That's Ezekiel chapter 18, verses 20 to 23, right? That's pretty incredulous, right? If you think about it, because the Gemara says, whoever weeps over the suffering of the righteous man, all his sins are forgiven. Right? What it means is someone did not come to die and atone for others. That explicitly Ezekiel says. Now, it could be they have a total mistranslation over there. Or maybe those verses don't exist. Very convenient. We're just going to erase it. Right? What do you do with that? Everyone agrees Ezekiel's a prophet. Christians agree. Muslims agree. So you have to come up with some very interesting interpretation. Tell me what it means. Right? So now when we look at this, we have to understand, Jewish heroes. Because the Isaiah 53, when we're talking about a servant over here, right? What are we looking at? We're looking at world Jewry over here. Meaning, we're talking about great people of the Jewish people, right? You look at somebody like Moses, someone like Elijah the prophet, Jeremiah, the Messiah, the son of Joseph, David. They exemplify being God's servant. They serve God no matter what happens, right? So now, if we look at that on Isaiah 53, so we have one interpretation. There's not any multiple interpretation over here. They didn't suggest, that it refers to either the righteous remnant of Israel, Moses, Jeremiah, or any other anointed leader. What did they say? What do we say over here? The servant in all four servant songs. We're not looking at individuals. We're not looking at Moses or Jeremiah or this righteous remnant. Who are we talking about? The faithful descendants of Abraham. Right? i.e. the Jewish people. Right? So there's an unprecedented worldwide repentance, a redemptive achievement. It's not by any one person. It's not like someone came on the scene and said, I'm here to take the bull by the horns. No one else is going to suffer. I'm going to suffer for everyone. No, not at all. It's a collective thing. It's the Jewish people as a whole. Now you're going to tell me, what about the Messiah? Commentary is going to lift up the Messiah's name more frequently than other faithful servants, right? That might be true. That might be true. But again, if you're looking at simple explanation is what? Simple explanation is that suffering servant is the Jewish people. Now, there's another way of looking at things, right? And that is what we'll call the drush, the homiletic, method of exegesis. Right? So according to that, what is the pshat or the simple explanation is going to be a foundational elucidation of any text. what is the simple explanation, right? Commentary is going to explain according, hopefully according to simple explanation. Some go further, some use homiletic interpretation, right? But in general, as the Gemara says in Shabbat 63a and Yevamos 11b, 24a, a verse cannot depart from its plain meaning, right? So therefore, midrashic interpretation is never intended to nullify, contradict, or injure the natural sense of a text, right? In other words, sometimes the simple explanation hard to understand, right? But that's the primary explanation, right? Also, it's not, a person cannot necessarily fully grasp as well midrashic commentary. You got to understand the simple explanation. You have to, explain that, in that way as well. But again, not so simple, right? Not so simple over here. So the Medrash, right, over here says that if you look at the astonished speakers in Isaiah 53, beginning chapter 1, verse 1 to verse 9, right, and the servant in Isaiah 52, verse 13, and 53:11, what do they say? Simple explanation is talking about the reaction of the astonished and all these kings of the nations when they discover the faithful members of Israel, always God's true servants. That's clear, right? It identifies the speakers as the servants. Again, you have to look at surrounding chapters here. You have to see the context of these other things. And they're consistent, right? They're consistent over here by saying the servant in these four things is talking about the Jewish people. But comes along the Medrash, interesting thing, that the Medrash says another thing. It says in Isaiah 53, never before in the history has any servant of God brought about mass repentance of the Gentiles. You don't see such a thing. Abraham, how many did he redeem? 70 souls in Haran. That's what the Torah says. Brought back 70 people. Right? The future of the house of David is going to be an unprecedented epic where Gentile kings of nations will repent, as described in this fourth servant song. In other words, the Messiah himself is going to bring about a time when the most important features of Isaiah 53 will materialize. What does that mean? Worldwide repentance of the Gentiles. You don't see that anywhere else. How many did Moses bring back? Single nation. There was a mixed multitude that came out and converted, but they didn't. There wasn't any great shakes, caused us a lot of problems, right? But he only drew out a single nation. The Messianic king's going to redeem other nations, right? If they survive, he's going to redeem other nations. Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9. For then I will make the peoples pure of speech. They're going to all invoke the name of the Lord, serve him one accord. So therefore, Gentiles are going to confess, be remorseful, and repent, as it says in Isaiah 53. So in this fourth servant song, it's unparalleled. Unparalleled than any other time in history. Where do you ever see Gentiles come to your light, kings of the brightness of your rising? Isaiah chapter 60, verse 3. Where do you see Gentiles going in the right way? Going in the right path. Kings going to be servants to Jewish people. They're going to quote unquote see the light. Right? Unbelievable. Over here. That's what it's talking about. That's what it's talking about over here. So, therefore, you're going to have righteous people that they're going to exemplify this suffering servant. But this future Messiah is what? He's going to be greater. He's going to be greater than anyone else. He's going to come from the Davidic line, as we spoke about before. And all the Gentiles, or a lot of them, are going to repent, as it says over here. So this is going to be an unbelievable thing. But it's only going to be made possible by the reign of the Messiah, who is the foremost member of God's suffering servant, i.e. the Jewish people. Not that he's just by himself, he's part of a nation. But he's the exemplary, the best of the nation, right, so to speak. And that's what he's going to accomplish. Global achievement in the final redemption. Abraham didn't do it. Moses didn't do it. Jeremiah didn't do it. Right? That's why it says in the Medrash, my servant shall be high, lifted up, lofty exceedingly. It will be higher than Abraham, more exalted than Moses, loftier loftier than angels. Now, with that being said, if that's what it's talking about, the best of the Jewish people, and this is what he's going to do: global achievements. Again, Abraham didn't do it, Moses didn't do it, Jeremiah didn't do it. Now, the Christians are going to claim, wow, JC fulfilled all this. Where's global achievement? Where's bringing peace? I mean, they have their answers, okay. So maybe they have their answers, right? But according to us, that hasn't happened. That for sure hasn't happened. You know, because they, oh yeah, brought world peace. Really? World looks more upside down than it's ever been, right? You know, certainly not. But, you know, that's what they'll claim. So in short, you know, we're gonna see, or as we've seen, you know, this is what it is. You know, this is what it's talking about. Now you got church apologists over here that are gonna look at, and we mentioned this before, right? Many times they hate rabbinic literature, right? They are gonna deride. They're gonna make fun. They're gonna cherry pick. You know, they're gonna cherry pick anything that the rabbis are gonna say. Okay, but as we said, there are ancient midrashic annotations on Isaiah 53, which can be ripped out of context, portrayed as supportive of Christian teachings, right? They can totally, you know, take it out of context. Unbelievably quoted, and this is what the missionaries say, because they want to, you know, get as many, you know, unclaimed souls, you know, as they can. You know, but what's the major problem here? The major problem, as we've always said, is the fact that what they do is they cherry pick. They don't look at the chapters surrounding. So according to what the Christians say, it's not supported by the chapters around it, right? Pretty clear. They are desperate. You know, they're desperate over here, and they're gonna say, oh, you know, these rabbis, what do they know? They're misinterpreting. I don't have to listen to them. But they're taking something so out of context without looking at chapters surrounding it. You know, you have 10 chapters, right? You know, all talking about a similar thing. Nope. We're going to forget about what all these other things say. We're going to interpret this according to the way we think. Well, very good. What's the problem? How can you take all these chapters out and say, no, that doesn't represent this. That doesn't represent that. That has no context over here. What are you talking about? Talking about 4 servants. If you're talking about 4 servants and the servants represent all of them, we're talking about the Jewish people, you can't just knock that out. You can't say, wow, all this history doesn't matter. Everything going around it is irrelevant, right? That's kind of hard to do. I mean, they do it, right? But that's, you know, that's obviously problematic. So what do they use? What do they use? They're going to use the 2nd century Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, right? A great rabbinic commentator, right? The comments on the comments on TaNaCh, on Isaiah 53. Now, what does the Targum mean? Literally, a translation. Now, the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel is not a word-for-word translation, right? Let's make clear. It's not a word-for-word translation, but it's a highly regarded Aramaic annotation. True, right? 100%. Right? He brings things to light. You know, it's not just a translation, it's more like an interpretation. You know, over here, he takes simple explanation, homiletic interpretation, you know, puts them together. So now, the Messiah who raised up is God's ideal servant. How does the Targum look at it? How does the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel look at it in Isaiah 52, verse 13? Right? Targum identifies the faithful of Israel who suffer vicariously. They suffer tremendously. Isaiah 52, verse 14. Now, what are the missionaries going to do? They're going to quote this and say they identify God's servant as the Messiah. Now, what's the translation? The Targum in Isaiah 52, verse 13 says, behold my servant Messiah. That's how the Targum learns. He says, my servant, not Israel, the Messiah, is going to prosper. He shall be high, increase, be exceedingly strong. But if you look at Isaiah 52, verse 14, the next verse, who does it identify as a long-suffering, humiliated servant? The Messiah? No. The Jewish people. Because it says that the house of Israel looked to him during many days, because their countenance was darkened among the peoples. their complexion darkened beyond the sons of man. Right? Now, he's talking about the Jewish people. So now we got a contradiction here, seemingly. The verse before is talking about what? Is talking about verse 13 is talking about the Messiah. Verse 14 is talking about the Jewish people, Israel. Now, what do the Christians do with this? So in Isaiah chapter 52, verse 14, it's talking about Israel. Guess what? They don't mention it. The Christians take it out. Right? There's not a single Christian apologist who quotes it. They don't quote it. They seemingly leave it out. Because upon these words of Isaiah, he's crushed and made ill, right? I.e. the Jewish people. Targum identifies suffering servant as who? Nation of Israel. Because it says over there, the Lord's good pleasure to refine, cleanse the remnant of his people in order to purify their souls from sin. They shall see the kingdom of the Messiah, shall increase their sons and daughters, blah, blah, blah. Who's that talking about? Talking about the Jewish people. And guess what? Church doesn't mention anything. They don't mention anything. They totally, when in doubt, ignore it. Something in front of your face, ignore it. Right? They're going to totally ignore it over here. Right? So if you look at Isaiah 53, verse 10, and the Christians sort of, totally take that out, that's significant. That is definitely significant that the nation of Israel, God's servant, suffered unimaginable torment at the hands of their Gentile neighbors, so their sins would be washed away. As Isaiah says, chapter 40, verse 2, speak tenderly to Jerusalem, declare to her, her term of service is over, her iniquity is expiated, for she has received at the hand of the Lord double for his sins. So therefore, there are 15 verses in the Targum's annotation of Isaiah. Right? In other words, Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, you got 15 verses from Isaiah 53, i.e. 52 verse 13 to 15 and 53 verses 1 to 12. You got 15 verses. But with surgical precision, what do missionaries do? They selectively and deliberately ignore almost all of them. It's interesting. They pick out one or two, and they ignore 15, right? Let's do the quick math over here. You take 2 out of 15, right? 2 out of 15 is you're taking 13%. Wow, that's nice. You're taking 13.333 till infinity percent of the verses, and looking at them properly. And the other 87%, it's astonishing. I mean, I shouldn't say it's astonishing, right? But that's what they do. You got 87.7777 forever they are ignoring. That's a pretty hefty thing. If you tell me they ignore 1%, 2%, a little bit more, we'll cut them a little bit of slack. I'm in a generous mood over here. Okay. You want to tell me they ignore 88%? 88% of the verses they totally ignore, right? Except the first verse in Isaiah 52, verse 13, right? So what do they do? Right? I guess we'll end with this. What do they do? So there's a technique of what we call wielding rabbinic literature as an evangelical sledgehammer, right? Unbelievable thing, right? In other words, they just take this idea and slam it as much as they can in order to make their point. And what they're going to do is they're going to hide all this. They're going to have this well-crafted message. The Jews don't know anything, right? They don't know anything about rabbinic literature. They don't know anything about Isaiah. They know very little over here, and they're going to conceal the truth. But it's an incredible thing. Again, if you tell me you don't look at some of the information, okay, right? You don't look at some of it, a minor amount, okay. Maybe it's crucial and you can't do that. But if you're going to tell me almost 88%, I'm going to round it up because I'm just going to round it up. 90%, almost 90, I'll say almost 90%, of that material they ignore. And there's a lot of things like this throughout TaNaCh that they pick one line out of something that has no context, whatsoever. They don't look at the context, around it and seemingly ignore, right? That's called the third and long. That's a punt. So here, they're claiming all these things, and they're saying, oh, it's like this and like that. You got a mistranslation, singular, it's not in singular, it's in plural, but you got all these references representing the Jewish people, not representing an individual, not to mention the fact you don't look at 88%. 88% over here, you just totally ignore the Targum Yonasan. Check mate. That's it. That's it for Isaiah 53. I mean, you don't get much better than that. We quoted 7, 8 verses that say the exact same thing. And all four, all these chapters talk about the servant, and it represents the same thing. That one verse represents this. It's like, they say, oh, you got to just believe and you got to have faith. No, it's faith with knowledge. This is just trying to jump through hoops to try and make something up, to pin something, or something doesn't exist. That's the point.
That is the point, no doubt about it. Rabbi, that was a really great finish right there, no doubt about that, for sure. Having all those cross-references are very, very key, for people to use, but I'm just hoping that they will, So, guys, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you same time, same place, Hashem willing, next week, and until then...
Not sure yet. We'll have to be in touch. I might be sipping my pina coladas by the pool.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
So
okay.
I'm gonna be in the States next week. I'm gonna see what my schedule is. We'll see. Okay. I'll give you a heads up before. We'll see what's gonna be. But if God forbid it won't be next week, I'll be back already by the next week, so we should be good. But next week we'll see where it's gonna go.
Sounds great. Thank you, guys.
Who knows? I might get all this hate mail. No one's gonna want to see it anyway. So we might just this might be the last show. It's been great. I love everybody. It's been a tremendous time.
That's funny.
See ya.
That's fun. How many shows do we have anyway? I'm just kind of curious. Now that you bring that up.
Over 120.
Really? Wow. Holy wow.
Over 120.
That's.
And I have the distinct pleasure of sizzling you at least half a dozen times.
100.
All by myself, sitting here in my sealed room, in Israel.
142. We have 142 shows. Yep. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Wow, that's not so good. Wait a minute. If I did 6 out of 142, let's do the math. Oh, that's only 4%. I only blew up your show 4%. I can't believe that. I thought it was a lot more than that. Seems like every other time. I don't know.
That's funny. That's funny. All right. Well, Rabbi, have a great day, and thank you again all for tuning in. Be sure to hit that like button if you enjoy these, and if you want to contribute to the show, to the task, TaNachTalk.com, TaNachTalk.com. Thank you, guys. We'll see you on the other side. Peace. Later. Shalom, my dear friends. Hope this message finds you well. If you like the way this channel is going, and the channel has been a blessing to you, please consider supporting the channel by going to the website, TaNachTalk.com, TaNachTalk.com. Thank you once again for your time and for supporting TaNaCh Talk. Shalom.